Hey everybody, it's Rajesh here.
Intane here.
Welcome to our podcast, Baskets of Knowledge, Chats with a Difference. In our podcast, we invite guests from around the country and around the world to talk about how they got to where they're at the moment. It's about a journey, it's about an experience, it's about their life. Kia ora koutou everybody, welcome to another episode of Baskets of Knowledge. As always, we appreciate you jumping on. At the moment, it's just me. Tanya will jump on in a bit. And as always, I like to share something that I put into my basket of knowledge since we last spoke. In the last week, I have just been thinking about something called a mirror neuron. It came into my world quite randomly. Mirror neurons is how we try and emulate and copy other people. And when someone says this, you might not believe it, but you seem to just copy it for some crazy reason. And it's so crazy how the brain does that there. And I was doing a bit more research about that there, and I read about these, I don't know if they're true or not, but I'm not a biologist, but anyway, about these neurons in our brain that, for example, if you see someone in pain, you feel the pain. If you see someone yawning, you also yawn. And there's really interesting philosophy around that there. And this person then took it onto mindset, how our mindset is affected by how other people think and what other people say and how we repeat that. And as I was reflecting about that, I thought about my own behaviors and how sometimes I'm doing things just because I'm trying to emulate others, but not even believing why I'm doing that there. So it's really done a whole big rabbit hole and a deep dive into this whole brain and how the brain actually works. Not a biologist, so it's pretty interesting for me. But anyway, that's my little learning from the week. And we're not here to listen to me, we're here to listen to our guest. And as you know, for regular listeners, we try and scour the country, scour the world to find people that we think are amazing. For anyone that's new, we think everyone is amazing. We think we would love to interview anybody and everyone on this planet because everyone's got a story to tell. But unlike Joe Rogan, we don't have lots of money, so we're just going to go with one person at a time, and each person has a great story. And I'm very lucky, very privileged to have our guest on tonight, or today, or this afternoon. I came across this person randomly through LinkedIn because LinkedIn is amazing. And when I started doing a bit of research, I found out, wow, they're an amazing person that's got a fantastic story to tell, but also they're on a podcast as well, which is really cool to have another podcast on here. And they're signing in and calling in from the other side of the world. I'm in Dunedin. They're over in the United States. So it's great to have our technology cross that barrier. Welcome to Bus Knowledge, Grace.
Thank you. And I'm still caught up on that first thing you were talking about. What was the name? What was the concept?
It's called the mirror neuron system.
Mirror neuron
system. Yeah.
That's fascinating because I'd always thought like you yawn because you're empathetic or something, like you feel sorry and you want to empathize with them that they're yawning, but that makes a lot more sense. So yeah, I'm still thinking about that.
But it's so crazy because people tell you so many different things about yawning. People are like, oh, you don't have enough oxygen, or it's so crazy, all the different myths and stories you hear about why people yawn.
And also you referenced Joe Rogan. That is so true. And as a fellow podcaster, I can appreciate all the work that goes into even getting me onto the podcast and lining it up and adjusting for my time schedule. So thank you. It's really special to be on here and I don't take that lightly. So thank you.
No worries, it's our pleasure. And Grace, for our guests who know nothing about you, do you want to tell them who you are at this point in time? And then we'll talk about how you got to where you are.
Right. I like how you say at this point in time. At this point in time, I'm living in Jersey City. So outside this window, which is dark right now, I can see the New York City skyline, which is beautiful. So they get to look at us and we get to look at them. And I bring up where I'm located because part of my story, which I'm sure we'll get into, is I came to the States for rowing and to go to college and then get my master's and decided to stick around. Throw in some COVID in there. That also helped shape my decision, I would say, because hands were forced. But I'm very grateful. And at this moment, I work my day job in marketing. And the passion project is Tall Poppy Talk. That's my podcast where, much like you, I'm very grateful to each week converse with someone, have a great kōrero, share that with the world. And outside of that, I run a lot. I'm trying to run the world majors. I recently started swimming because I think an Ironman's in my future. So I'm very athletically driven as well. That's a brief summary of where I'm at right now.
Beautiful, and I love that's a summary because there's so many talking points from there, which I'm sure we'll delve into as we go on. Um, but home is New Zealand. Home is Cambridge. This is where you grew up, and sitting here today in Jersey, looking out the New York skyline. If I said to you 7 years ago, 8 years ago, hey Grace, you were going to be living in Jersey on a rowing because of a rowing scholarship, would you have been like, yep, this is my dream, or what would your story been? Your
That's
reaction?
yes, such a good uh prompt, I guess, because 7, 8 years ago I was at Cambridge High, very proud Cambridge High. I was head girl, and that was the feat. Like that was the thing I had been working towards. I was stoked. And then I started to consider, all right, what's next? Knew I wanted to do something probably in like radio because I think, as I still do, broadcasting is an incredible medium. It's where we tell stories, and I genuinely am passionate about that. So AUT up in Auckland, uh, that's where I went off, and I thought, oh, I should, you know, stereotyped myself, I should do something more quote unquote smart, which is so false. But at the time, so I thought I'll do a law, I'll do like a double degree. And I've grown so much since then because that's that was just trying to fit into a stereotype I'd made. So yeah, 7, 8 years ago, I was pretty set. I'm gonna go study law, try to get into the radio scene. But near the end of high school, I just picked up rowing because
As you
someone
do,
else,
as you
as
do,
you do.
yeah.
I didn't row Marty or anything. And in all honesty, uh, I always joke, I say, I started for a boys gone, rowing stayed. And I thought, what is this? Fell in love with it, went 3 days in a row, and just thought, all right, I'm still going to go up to Auckland. I've got this plan, as most year 13s in New Zealand think, this is what I'm going to do. And the rowing just stayed, and I kept it up in Auckland. Thought, oh, I actually love this. And I'm very proud to say, like, you can pivot, which at the time felt like the most opposite thing. Because, yeah, 7, 8 years ago, I was head girl that had been the goal. I'd got the goal. All right, what's the next goal? Let's move. And then not even 6 months into that so and so plan, being like, oh, there's something completely out of left field. But if you're not fluid enough to pivot, you let opportunities pass you by. And if I hadn't have followed that passion, transferred to Waikato initially, thinking, right, I'm still going to do that law thing, but I'm closer to the rowing and closer to Karapiro. And it was in that year that recruiters from the States started to reach out because I was doing well. And at first, honestly, I said no. It's like, I have the plan, right? And maybe a month later, I was like, no, actually, this is an opportunity I can't pass. Oh, Tani, kia ora. He's joined the conversation.
Kia ora.
Yeah, perfect timing. Perfect timing. And it's perfect time because we had a plan to start this podcast at 1 o'clock New Zealand time. Tanya was like, actually, I can't do it, but hey, we just got it going. But
We
like
pivot.
you had a plan. You had a plan. But what I like about that is how you emphasize that most year 13s, and I think this is globally, we might think it's New Zealand, but most year 13s or final year school students go, I need to have this um, smart thing that I have to do, whether it's going to university or a polytech, because the other stuff, the trade stuff, is not seen as smart, or taking a gap year or choosing a sporting career pathway is not seen as a smart option because it's not a safe option according to the world. And which is what you did. You're like, okay, cool, the world says this at year 13. I am going to follow this world thing. But I guess 6 months growth, you go, wait a minute, the world story is not my story.
100%. And I think it takes role models, right? And sometimes they're older than you, and then sometimes they're the same age or younger, and you start to see them shaped. And one of my good friends, Mitch, went to outdoor ed school down in like
Yep.
Greymouth. And we were like, oh, what's he doing? Because he did physics and like calculus and all those things. We thought, oh, surely he'll do like engineering or something. No, and he's like, this is what I want to do. And he's one of those people that was just so sure of himself. And now he's like, for the past 4 or 5 years, he literally follows summers as a whitewater raft guide, a kayaker. He was working for this awesome school that pays him to, like, I think he was in Poland and then he was in Mexico, and I actually don't know where he is now, maybe California. Like, his full-time job is to be like an outdoor ed, not even instructor, like educator. And when this was happening, I was like, okay, that's a role model right there in the making, because he's like, I know what I want to do and I know what brings me joy and how I'm going to make my impact. And he was not swayed by the pressures and stereotypes that others had put on him. So that's where I love to tell people, like, oh, I pivot. No, like 3 universities, 3 years, and I have half a degree that I won't use because it's not useless. And that's how I think the Kiwi in us is like, oh, that's useless, that's wasted. Not at all. Like, if anything, I learned a great lesson, which is I do not want to study law. And that's a really good thing to learn.
Yeah, you rather learn that early on rather than do the whole law degree and go, oh, damn it, I was just doing it just because, and now I don't become a lawyer anymore or practice law.
Yeah, and also when I was given the opportunity to come to the States to row, like I would say like I was good, but I wasn't great. And I knew my limitations, like an Olympic pathway wasn't on the cards. And I think sometimes we are fed, it's you get like, if you try really hard, you can do anything. Yeah, but then there's also times when you're like 20 and you're not pulling the times that you need to be to be getting into the teams and programs, and you think, how much more do I want to give this?
Yeah,
And Hamish Bond, actually, which if you follow rowing or you're avid sportsman, is part of the iconic Kiwi Pier, and it's Cambridge, it's a small town. And I was talking to him and he said, if you see it as a sacrifice, it's not for you,
yeah,
right? Because he doesn't see the early mornings and the missing out on social events in this. So that's not a sacrifice, it's part of the journey.
yeah.
And that was the biggest distinction, because I was like, oh, I see those as a sacrifice. I don't see that as part of my journey. And so accepting like, all right, maybe this rowing thing's not going to be a long-term career. Where can I go with that? And there's only so long your body can be a vessel to fund and give you the opportunity to go to the States. So it's like, all right, Jersey it is, I guess.
But it's so cool, Grace, because as you said, that term sacrifice, if you take it into any context, whether it's work, play, your friends, anything you do in life, if you see the word sacrifice, then actually you seem to be not doing something to do something else, which means that whatever you're doing is not the primary thing that you really want to do, which is such a crazy, you know, um, explosion moment for me as you think of it that way, that sacrifice versus passion, I guess, or passion. I don't know. It's yeah, it's blown my mind that whole phrase.
Yeah, no, I was like, okay, Hamish Bond. Like literally to hear this, I was like, pinch me moment, hearing it
Yeah,
right from the horse's mouth. And what else did he say, which I loved, was like, because at the time, going to the States to rowing was honestly seen as like a closed door on coming
yeah,
back to New Zealand. Things have changed, which is awesome. In my opinion, they had to. They were losing too many athletes to the US system. But he said, if you're going to be good, you're going to be good when you come back, right?
yeah.
Like if you're good, they can't ignore it. Almost be so good they can't ignore you. And so those two parts I take from that one conversation with him was like, check in with yourself if you feel like, oh, I'm sacrificing something, instead of like, oh, this is a part of the journey. If you feel like it's taking from your life rather than motivating, that's one thing. And the other thing is like, yeah, sometimes just be so good that they can't ignore it, but have patience that might take a while.
Yeah, and that's so true. Talking about patience, you spoke about how you um, got these offers, and you were saying no. You were saying no. What is going on through your mind as you're thinking about, have an offer in front of you, but Grace is going, nah, not going to happen because what? Because why?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, at the time, I'd been rowing for maybe a year and a half, and it was like, sign this paperwork, come to the States. It's 3.5, 4 year obligation. And I was like, I don't even know if I'm going to like rowing that much. And I will say, because it's not always, sunshine and roses, you have to be authentic. There was times where I was like, this is the fun has been lost in this. It definitely is. It's a great job, but it is a job nonetheless. And near the end of my rowing career, I found like the love for it once again. But yeah, that hesitation was like, no, my gosh, like I've pivoted once. I need to at least stay here. And then actually a teacher of mine in high school got me to come in when I told him, oh, yeah, I'm gonna go to the States. It's like, oh, this is a great story because it tells people like you don't have to have it together. And I remember laughing. I was like, okay. we could reframe that a little bit. But now I've come to really embrace it because it like trying to tell people you don't have to be set in your ways, uh, but balancing that with like not being completely like airy fairy. Yes,
Yeah,
it is a balance.
yeah, totally. There is a case of being spontaneous, but also a case of having a plan. The thing with a plan is you can change the plan, but if you have zero plans, you have nothing, and you just hope for the best. Hope is great, but with hope times zero is zero. So it's good
Yeah.
to have a plan that you can change. Yeah, which is great. And I love what you said about be the best. So they have to say no to you. And I have a saying that I keep telling students and people that I work with that are trying to apply for things, and I just say, hey, give them a reason to give them a reason to say no to you. They've got to try and find the no as opposed to saying yes to you. You give them everything, and they have to find a reason to say no to you. And that's a reframe to saying you've got to say yes. And I use that, and it's because when you say that, there you give your 100%, and then it's over to their court to find a reason to say no to you, and then you can ask them, okay, cool, why did you say no to me? And they've got to give you the answer.
I really like that. It's almost like, yeah, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. I don't know if you've heard
Yeah,
that one. It's simple and it takes no extra time, but it is like a skill that you have to work on. I think that's awesome that you're in
totally.
that message.
But it's hard because, like you said, everyone believes that they have certain X, Y, Z. A bit like yourself, you thought you had to be the best rower to be able to get the scholarship to go to. We all. It's not anyone's fault. It's just the way the world feeds us the story here, and that's just the way we live our lives. And like I said, sometimes you have to have people that just disrupt their thinking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, it was funny too, because then I got to the program, Rutgers was my university, and you can't say that without an American accent. It's just hard. Um, and I remember I turned up and the team was 90, like 90
Oh well.
girls. And I had been like pretty big. I'm like 5'11, I was like, I'm the man. And then I turned up here and I was like, I am a small little shrimp. Like these girls like jacked, they're so strong, they're like this and that. And it was like, oh, I'm not the fastest, strongest. I'm not even maybe top 20, top 30. So really quickly I was like, I need to find another element. Like my strength is not going to be as much physical. I can't compete on that way, on like that length. So leaned in really heavy on the beginning of like, I'm gonna be like that ultimate team player hype woman, because those are the people you want on your boat. Those are the
Yeah.
ones who motivate you. Like you want other people to pull harder because you're in the boat. I
Yeah.
had to shift because I was like, I cannot compete on raw power. That is not happening.
And it's great awareness there. As you said before, you can give your 100%, but your 100% is your 100%, and that's not going to change. You go, right, cool. This is my 100% here, but I have strengths and abilities here, and I'm going to use that there. And I guess, Tana, you see that in your coaching when you're coaching young Wahine.
Yeah, definitely. And that's probably something, as we start to approach pathways and stuff like that, just having an understanding that, there's much more to sport than the actual skills and drills that the girls have. There's a lot of players in there that just their character and their personality really stands out. And that's kind of what you need in the team. You need to find that balance. But also, as we get to like the higher rep stuff that they get into, and especially, being a smaller region in the rugby league sense, particularly, is just really having that understanding that that you might not necessarily think you have the skills, even if they are there or thereabouts, but you have other values that are strong in the team and that will help the team. The classic example for me is our girls. Like they're used to being challenged. They're not used to just winning everything, and so when they go to that national level, they actually go there, and when the game's quite tight and it's quite a struggle in the game, or they're down a try or two, they've got that composure and they've got that understanding of they can stick in the battle. Whereas some of those girls who have gone through, pretty unscathed and pretty, they're used to winning, they kind of get to that stage and they don't know what to do because they've never had that experience. And so that's why I try and reframe and tell the girls, you might not necessarily think you're the best, but that doesn't have to be seen as a negative thing. You can almost flip it and show that, that's really going to strengthen you as a player as you go through those higher levels because you already have an understanding of what it means to lose and how you can, reframe that or re-navigate that to yeah, try and better the team.
Tani,
Yeah,
I
so
love
true.
that. Sorry, I was just like, that's so awesome that's the message you're spreading too. And Jade Coates, who I interviewed, she was my first guest actually on the Tall Poppy Talk podcast, and she's playing for Fijiana Jura, like the
Yeah.
Fiji women's rugby team. And she has had like, unfortunately, a lot of injuries, right?
Mm.
And her ability, much like you say, like you might lose like this game, or you might not be able to get into this team at the moment, but building like resilience and adversity and pushing through, being able to like have the long-term vision, or I call it like long-term gratification. It's like, I'm not going to see it now, but these will stack up. And she talks about the importance of that. And then also like trust, because like you said, the qualities in players, maybe not everyone's got the greatest like fast twitch muscles, or they're like not as just hand-eye coordination, but those trust. If you know like, well, Jade's gonna be there, she's got my back, she's coming in, that goes, sheesh, like that's way more important, I think, when you're looking to build a team than necessarily like the hard skills.
Well, and that's
That's,
what I've discussed with the players too around, like, last year we weren't really competitive, but I think if you can build that trust in a team, you can build a team environment, like the skills and drills will come. You can teach anybody a skill or a drill realistically. It's not always going to be that top level that you want, but you can pretty much, I have this belief that you can teach anybody, to a certain extent or a certain competency, like a skill or drill, but if you don't have that trust, and especially in a team environment, like there's no point having a bunch of individuals in a team. And that's
Yeah.
the hard thing that you try and reframe when, players are always push that you have to be the best, you have to be, at XYZ, where in actuality you can have a bunch of players that aren't at that top level, they're at that middle level, but because they trust each other and because they know each other a lot better, they succeed in the long run.
Yeah, totally. It's cool.
that's so true. And again, that's a whole nother amazing path we can go down, because I watched Invictus again over the weekend. I don't know if you've seen Invictus, but that's stuff. It's one of my inspirational movies, and I like where during the training the coach goes, we're going to lose all our games, but we're going to be the fittest team out there. That was his mentality at that point in time. It's a sore topic for All Blacks, but we won't go there. But being from Africa, I'm going to claim that as a great win because it was a bigger picture. But we won't go that far there. So Grace, rowing the rowing is what gets you into the United States. But as you're there, and as you said before, you realize, okay, rowing is a small part of your life. It's not your whole life. As you started going, all right, cool. There's other things in the States that excite me. And was the plan at the start? You said COVID changed the plan for you again. I'm seeing quite a bit of you pivoting here going on here. Now, this is a crystal ball quite question. Suppose COVID didn't happen, were you on your way back to New Zealand, or was being in the States a whole different opportunity that you saw, wait a minute, actually, there's some really cool things here that I can level up, which I might not get if I come back to New Zealand?
Yeah. Oh, it's funny trying to put myself back in that mindset. I remember when I left Waikato, I thought, okay, I have until like 2027 to come back and finish that degree. Like I was still convinced,
Still
like
got
I
time. You
will
still got
come
time,
back.
Grace.
Yeah, I know. I still have time. I'm pushing it now. And I thought, all right, I'll go for the 2.5 years, because the way the school semester works is like their fall, they call it, is like August, September. And I wanted to finish my second year at Waikato Uni, and that's a full year course. So I came in the spring. They call us spring babies. Um, and it's actually, find this interesting. I feel like Tane coaching too. Our coach would bring in, oh, sorry, my thing just went. Our coach would bring in 1 to 2 like spring baby recruits, because at that point maybe the team's gotten a little used to who's like fastest, what the boat lineups are, etc. So he'll almost insert like some fresh blood to like throw the water up a little bit. So I say that just because it makes me laugh every time. But I came in, and like you said, that crystal ball of what was I going to do. I thought, sweet, I'll do 2.5 years, then I'll go back. And I start, and I was like, this is like the movies. This is so fun. We're tailgating, we're going to football games. Like I always tell athletes, if they're looking at schools, find one with a football and a basketball team, because that's hype. Like that's got that whole college atmosphere. And COVID came within just over the first year. And pretty quickly the decision was like, do you go home? Like most people were flocking back to New Zealand, or do you stay put? And I stayed put. And Rutgers was really good at like taking care of the international athletes. I think it gave me purpose because every day we trained, we tested every day. Rutgers I think they invested quite early in like the saliva testing. So we got really good at that. Like I've done so many of those nose swabs, it was ridiculous, but it gave me something to do. And an interesting concept in the States is it's called red shirting. So if you are injured or you have a sickness and it impedes you from being able to compete athletically that year, your eligibility is extended. So in terms of like that clock, if once you graduate high school, you have 5 years to complete 4 seasons. And COVID gave us all a red shirt. So we got to stay. And that was that first decision. Yeah, of like, well, am I going to go back or am I going to stay? And I was like, I'm I'm enjoying it. But also once again, I was like, I could squeeze a master's into this. Like, that's crazy. Let's go for it, full throttle. And then during that master's year, I thought, I could stay in the States and get a visa. Like I can try. And it's a lottery system. So I was like, well, I'm fortunate that I even get to put my hat into the lottery system. Let's do it. And fortunately, I got it. So there's been instances where I was like, oh, just leave it up to fate a little bit. And I remember when I got the work visa, the whole, survivor's remorse. You're like, I don't deserve it. Someone else deserves this more, etc. Like, but I had to really quickly flip that frame and think this is a great opportunity. And I do often feel that it's representing a pathway that is possible. And it's cool to see more athletes who come to the States who maybe had intentions, like you said at the beginning, to return back to New Zealand, either compete athletically or pursue like some career back home. I like the idea that I get to talk to people and be like, no, this is something we can do too. Like, this is crazy. You can stay in the States if you want for however long that may be. So, yeah, I don't know if COVID hadn't happened, if I would or wouldn't. And I honestly don't think about it because it's what happened.
Yeah, totally, totally. The reason I asked that question is because, like again, it goes back to what you said before. We all have a plan, and you did have a plan. You said, okay, cool, I'll come here for 2 years and see what happens. But then life throws things at you, and the plan changes. And I think for our listeners out there, there's such thing as fate out there, but you have a hand in fate. And I think the hand in fate for you was, hey, master's application for a visa because you saw opportunities in in what we call the worst best thing to happen to us in life sometimes. Sometimes something's bad, it's got to happen for things to become good. And we don't see it at that point in time, but here you are today and you go, boom, here I am, looking at the New York skyline, which is great.
Yeah. And shout out kudos to like my whānau, my family here, because my mum and dad did the gap year, turned 5 years. Like dad went over to the UK when he was, I don't know, 18, 19, 20, whatever, went for 5 years. My mum went for 2, 3 years. And so for them, they really like instilled the whole like life is for living. And I,
Yeah.
now that I'm older, can appreciate that that's a really like a gift that's how they approached it, where they're like, yeah, here, go do that. And my sister, she's had a much more like plan in terms of like she's very driven and ambitious, and she knew she wanted to go to Auckland Uni and do this and get the job, and she's done that and she's thriving. And so sometimes you feel the pressure because she's an older sibling to be like, Paige is crushing it. Like I need to get on her level. But she, in the same way as my parents, is like, oh no, go. Like that's fun. We're super supportive siblings and parent relationship in terms of like do what's best for you. And they never put pressures on me to
And yeah,
like a strict thing. And I'm really grateful for that because I know that that's not the case for everyone.
I'm glad you put that out there because sometimes people think it's easy, but it is easy. It's easy when you have support structures, but it's even with your support structures, it's quite challenging sometimes. Being across the world. Um, during COVID, this is when I realized for the first time how far I was from my parents. My parents live in Zimbabwe, and they supported me. Everything's all cool, but at that point in time, you go, wait a minute. If something happens, I can't do anything. I'm stuck. I'm stuck. And that may have happened to you or not when you go, actually, wait a minute, when the realization of how far you are from your final hits, you go, wait a minute. It's a bit different normally because normal life, you can just wake up in the morning, oh, I need to go. You can buy a ticket and off you go in 2 days' time or whatever if you have the money. But at that point in time, actually, I can't go. Unless I have $1 zillion, I'm not going anywhere, which is quite
And
crazy.
yeah, it was freaky. So, for context, I studied my undergrad, which is like your bachelor's, was communication
Uh,
because we love communication. And
couldn't tell. Couldn't
actually,
tell.
it was actually labor relations as well, which is like HR. And that's not because I wanted to do it. I have like a conspiracy theory that when they get transfer students, because I was technically a transfer, they put us into the labor relations school because I guess maybe their intake numbers aren't so great, like whatever it is. But me and all the other international transfers got put like mandatory into an HR. So anyway, I have that. There were some nice, interesting classes about that. But I just focused on the communication. And then my master's was in political science, specifically like the United Nations global policy. And during my time here, obviously the pandemic, there was a lot of political elements.
Yeah.
And I had the joy of also being here for the 2020 like elections. And we're in a pretty similar situation once again. So being like a foreigner who doesn't get to vote, so my opinion can stay very much my opinion, observing and like I remember driving into New York because I wanted to like pick up like some marketplace. It was actually a rowing machine in Erg. And I remember like we drove in, my friend and I, and it was so deserted that you could do a U-turn
Oh,
like
wow.
in the middle of like Broadway. I was like, this is freaky and cool. Now it was cool thinking back, but at the time I was like, this is like the apocalypse. Like, what is happening? So those were really like embedded into my brain of like, this is a very unique experience of the pandemic.
Yes, it's so crazy. You think back about that time, there you go, wow, what a crazy, crazy time.
Oh, I
And I guess,
know.
I guess, for New York being such a crazy busy city versus Dunedin, a little bit different, or Taranaki, very, very different. But that's so crazy when there's no one around. I'm going to shift focus a bit, Grace, because I want to touch on your podcast. And the reason I want to touch on it is because your title is so beautiful. The Tall Poppy podcast. Do you want to tell us about why you chose that? I mean, I know why, but for our listeners who know nothing about why you've chosen that, yeah, let's speak about this unfortunate syndrome, kind of a syndrome, quality that a lot of people from New Zealand have, where they just don't like to celebrate their successes.
Yeah, and it's funny because at first I called it like a cultural phenomenon. Sounds
Yeah,
really cool.
yeah,
But it does encompass like tall poppy syndrome. When I started the podcast, so Tall Poppy Talk was like end of 2022. It's been just over a year and a half. It was like I'd noticed this real dichotomy between my upbringing in New Zealand, where humility is a core value, and I think it grants us so many great qualities. It does a sense of community, pride, togetherness, like, but there is a degree of, all right, but like if you put yourself out there, I guess the analogy, the metaphor is you're a poppy field, and when you start to grow too high, we chop people back down. When I came to the States, and it honestly felt like a little bit false at first, the level of like, oh my God, you're amazing, hype, what's happening? I was like, this is
not
false.
real. Yeah.
This cannot be, or the self-advocation. And I started to learn that there's too many people here for you not to self-advocate. If you don't, someone else happily will, and you'll miss out on an opportunity. So there's like a practical, logistical element to it. But also, it's really fun, like jumping on the bandwagon, celebrating. Like you'll find in the States, if it's St. Paddy's Day, everyone's Irish and they're wearing green and they're out on the streets. Like they jump on those bandwagons to celebrate, and it does make life quite fun, and it makes people more willing to pursue things. And I'm saying this with like hesitation because obviously, like any environment, I'm only getting my perspective of it.
Yes.
So it could be
Yep.
very different to others. But the dichotomy I mentioned is in New Zealand, I think sometimes you get that, classic saying, try hard. Oh, they're a bit of a try hard, you
Hmm.
know, and that just means you're trying hard. Like when we really break those two words down, it actually should be a positive thing. And we
Yeah,
encourage people to try hard. But at what point does it like swap from try hard, give it, be a go-getter to, okay, now you're try hard.
yeah,
Somewhere in between, we jump that like gap. And the podcast initially was I want to talk to people who are tall poppies, who are, putting themselves out there and chasing something. Take a moment to celebrate that success, ask them questions that maybe typically you wouldn't because you'd rather like not, and encourage more people to pursue it. Like I mentioned before, circling back to my friend Mitch, he was putting himself out there, trying something new, and he's like, I'm gonna go down to outdoor ed school, and none of his mates were doing that. And we probably gave him flack, honestly, like, why are you doing that? Why don't you want to come to Canterbury or like Waikato or this and that? And he stuck himself out there and said, I know what I want to do. And now he's bloody flourishing because he continued. So really, like, as you can tell, I start rambling when I get on the subject.
no,
What
it's
I
great.
started, thank you. What I started the podcast was like, I wanted to talk to tall poppies and understand how they'd, doubt and overcome tall poppy syndrome. Pretty swiftly, I've learned that like every person I talk to, they're like, oh, yeah, maybe I had it, maybe I didn't. Adversity is a part of the journey.
Yeah,
And actually, one Jonah Oliver, who's like this high performance psychologist, his take on it is that if you don't experience adversity and you don't build that resilience from tall poppy yin one another, you won't be as successful because, like you mentioned, Tane, when you always win, the
yeah,
first time you lose or you actually encounter struggle, you're like, I do not know how to handle this.
yeah.
Whereas when you've gone through it, you know that you're robust and you can deal with it and you've built those skills that you kind of had to learn on the job.
Yeah, that's so true. I love the way you put that whole part of the tall poppy talk and syndrome, because I'll tell you a story. When I've started using LinkedIn quite a bit. I just post on there all the time, and I remember I remember this really blatant. Some of my colleagues were like, "Oh, look at you just posting all the time on LinkedIn. What's up?" And I was like, well, which is in New Zealand because people don't use it much. But everyone else around the world is like, hey, this is amazing that you post often. And I was like, what a crazy different dichotomy of conversation over the same post. So, my philosophy when I work with young people, and Tanya knows as well, I was like, put yourself out there, just put yourself out there, because the worst that can happen is someone says no. And by someone saying no, you can actually grow. But if you don't put yourself out there, you're not going to get the no, you're not going to grow. All you're going to hear are yeses at that time there, which builds up a false picture around you. That everyone says yes to me all the time or wins all the time.
Yeah, and again, like I feel like the caveat of all the conversations is context is essential and it changes.
100%.
Um, but I listened to one podcast and the actor's Adam Devine, who's
Yeah,
like the guy from Pitch Perfect, he's hilarious. And someone asked him a similar question, and he's like, it doesn't matter. And I was like, oh, what does he mean? And he's like, you are the main character in your story. You're a side character in other people's story, even in your family, your
yeah,
friends who care and you love so much. Maybe you're a more prominent side character, but you are like, no one thinks about you as much as you think about
yeah,
yourself and what you're
yeah,
doing. So even when you do get that comment, like, oh, you're on LinkedIn a bit much, they move on and they start thinking about
yeah.
what's for dinner or what they're going to do at the gym later. Like, but
So
if
true.
you let those things restrict you, like, at the end of the day, it's only you, like, not to get like too existential, but like when you're at the end of your life, you're going to be like, oh, I did what I wanted to do and I gave it my all and I have no like
Yeah,
qualms with it. Or do you go, I'm really glad that I didn't pursue the podcast so that my neighbor doesn't think I'm a tryhard? Like, no, why? No, I know which one I'd prefer, but it's taken me a while to get to that point.
100%. I think context is very, very important, because it's easy for us to say this right now, but 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we'd be in the same boat going, just saying to other people, like you said to your friend Mitch, hey, what are you up to? I'll be the same. What is this guy up to? Phew, why are they doing that there? Because they were not living the cookie cutter life that I wanted them to live for me, because it wasn't my world. So why are they doing something different? And it's crazy how we do that. We portray our version of the world onto other people, and it's so crazy how that happens. So I love that. And as you've explored your journey. Actually, I'm going to ask you the question is why a podcast? Why did you? I know you communication is your jam, and this is coming through so beautifully today. Um, why a podcast? Why didn't you want to write a journal article or a news report or yeah? Why did you choose that?
Yeah, well, so every day I listen to the Fletch, Vaughan and Haley, like ZM podcast. I just think podcasting is a great medium, so clearly we all do. And when I finished rowing, initially I had a lot of time on my hands because I wasn't rowing all the time. And I also was like, I don't know what to talk about because I've literally been talking about boats and lineups and times and races for years. Uh, I'd run out of different conversation. And also, I was like, I still want to be in radio. That passion's still there, or storytelling, documentary making, but I didn't study it. And I'm kind of on the back foot. What has no barrier to entry except work hard and be disciplined, which fortunately rowing had instilled in me. I know how to do those two things. So it's like podcasting, yeah, I mean, as both of you know, there's some pretty basic setup things. And then from there, it's just grind, get the people you want to talk to, pump it out. But in terms of the topic and the actual like tall poppy talk element, was I thought, what's something I could do every single week that if no one listened, fortunately people do now, but if no one listened, I would still be motivated because you hear the stats that most podcasts peter out after like 3 episodes
Yes.
because the hype is gone and no one's listening and this is taking hours and we come back to that thing I mentioned of is it a sacrifice or is it
Yep.
like an investment in it?
Yep.
I thought every single week I can talk to a new person, learn something new, get new topics of discussion, harness and like strengthen those skills. Like I listen back to my first episodes, probably like you two both do, and you're like, oh my goodness, I had some what was going on? But I don't look back and think, oh, shame on you. I think back with pride of like, look how much you've grown. So there was a whole like plethora of things that came together was like, I can talk to people, I can work on this broadcasting skill, and I can be motivated each week by it, regardless of if I get traction listenership wise.
And that's so true. Sometimes the two of us get focused on our numbers just because we're humans, right? We're looking at numbers. But then when we stop and reflect and go, actually, wait a minute, I learned so much on that podcast. I would never have crossed paths with you, Grace, ever if you hadn't had done that podcast with Kobe, and that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't had done a podcast with Kobe. So it's so crazy how it all happens. So just in this conversation alone, if we have no listeners, hopefully we do. I mean, I've learned so much about tons of things from you. And it goes back to why we do the podcast. And I think Tanya and myself always reflect about this, because it is a lot of work, but we never think about it as work. We just go, right, cool, let's find the next person. Let's do it, because like you, we could just stop a long time ago. We're done. But it's a bit. Tanya, I'm speaking for you. Hopefully, I'm right here.
Yeah, no, I really enjoy it. It's a good, yeah, yeah. I think at the start, you're right. You focus so much on the numbers and trying to make it perfect and stuff like that, but you realize pretty quickly that, like as you say, I just enjoy the conversations, learning about new people, but also, like obviously our listeners hopefully get a lot from our episodes, but I think also like a lot of the times the episodes have been quite pivotal for where I am in that point in life. So yeah, it's been quite good to have those parallels. So there's almost a double meaning that comes out of the podcast.
Yeah, and do you reckon too, like if someone's like, oh, what's your proudest like takeaways? Comes to mind is even like I interviewed someone today and at the beginning he's like, oh, I'm honestly quite nervous. I'm not really looking forward to this. And you think, oh no, and by the end of it, he said, oh, you put me at ease. That
Yeah,
was nice. That was a great conversation. And my number one focus every conversation is I want them to be confident and comfortable with what we put out.
yeah.
So I always preface it with it's about you. And if the only thing that happens is me and this person have a great yarn and they feel good about it, like that's the biggest win. And that makes me feel really good.
It's so funny. We going to share some of our trade secrets right now, but at the end of our podcast, after we do the recording, we always just stop and reflect. And the first question we always say is that felt good. We don't even talk about the content. We just go that felt good. And there's one podcast that I know that I didn't feel good, and I felt really bad about it. And I Tanya wasn't there at that time, and I messaged him. I was like, "This that was a terrible podcast," and I had because I reflected and I was like, "Actually, wait a minute, I didn't make the person feel comfortable." So it goes back to, and that was on me and a lot of other things. But I like the way you say it doesn't actually matter what the content is; it's about the comfort level. And hopefully we all try to do that. I mean, I know I've heard your podcast and you do that quite naturally, and you've done that today. So this is really beautiful.
Well, thank you. And thank you for sharing that, right? That's your authenticity. I've had quite a few. Like I remember changing, I have a sign-off question, and it's, if you had to listen to just one musical artist for the rest of your life, who would it
Yeah,
be and why? And I changed it, and in all honesty, at first it was if you had to have just one meal, what would it be? And I had one guest, if you've listened to them all, but I won't say names. And they just went, really? Like, you're asking that? And I didn't even think, because I wasn't there, that people have different relationships to food, right? And me
yeah,
asking them such a question is a bit triggering.
yeah,
And your heart sinks and you're like, oh my goodness, but you cannot berate yourself
yep,
for not even the mistake, but you go, noted, let's ask a different question at the
yeah,
end that might not trigger someone. And then the other one thing I wanted to share, and you mentioned because you've got so many episodes right in the catalog, I think of it like a bookshelf, which is cool, and people can go back and listen to like
yes,
old ones. It was Marius van der Poel. He's on Team Emirates New Zealand, like sailing team. It's probably getting ready to sail sometime soon. And he told me that in prep, he was listening to an interview I'd done like well over a year ago with Martin Toomey, who's the chef de mission for the Winter Olympics. And like you said, right, I'm talking to these people that I'd have no excuse to talk to otherwise. But now I can say, hey, I'm a podcaster. Can
yeah,
we chat? And he said he was listening during training, and someone leans over and goes, oh, Martin, he coached me when he was like in middle school or something, right? And then the strength and conditioning coach comes over and goes, oh, Martin, I know him. And Marius shared with me that this interaction had happened, and they all like reflected on how much of a legend Marius is because of that. And
yeah.
now still like that sticks out of my mind of like, that's a win, because it gave these people an opportunity to like reflect, as you mentioned, and have like community together.
That's so beautiful. But hey, what a timely question, because we've been speaking for almost an hour, Grace, and like I said to you before, this hour just flies by crazy fast. Um, Sign of questions. We have a great sign of question for you. As our podcast is called Baskets of Knowledge, and we invite every guest to share a piece of knowledge to put into our kit, into a basket. For myself, Tanya, and for our listeners, it can be anything, and it's something you shared lots today, but it could be something from your rowing, from leaving home, from your anything. Um, Feel free to share a piece of knowledge. We'll give you two pieces of knowledge if you like, because you're up so late there.
It's funny because I knew this was coming and I still wasn't ready for it. Like classic, right? Because I've listened. Um, Maybe I'll give like a practical piece of knowledge and then like a more like feel good one. Um,
Right.
my practical one is that like I'm someone who's obviously come to the States and I've done that journey and it's all great, but there was a lot of paperwork involved. If people are listening, athlete or not, who think like, oh, I maybe I'd want to like check out the States as an option. I didn't even think that was it. I thought it was London or Canada or Australia. Like if they've got that itch to travel, like a practical piece of knowledge there is there are opportunities for Kiwis in the States, whether they want to come study, in which I point you into the direction of like Crimson Education. Actually, this fellow Jamie Tout um, tries to make that like academic pathway, or reach out to me. I know the athletic pathway, or there's like green card. I'm only saying that because I had no idea the States was like an option, and it really is. And I think that's cool if that's a door you want to take. And then the more like feel good basket of knowledge, I actually had this with a guest who's coming out shortly, Bailey Walters, and she's like a more holistic nutrition specialist, right? And her whole thing is the way you talk to yourself, but it's the way you talk about yourself. They take no extra time, but they can make the biggest impact on how you feel, because self-deprecation is another Kiwi classic.
Yeah.
We the butt of our jokes sometimes to make other people feel good, but it's not even how like that self-talk, which I think is a pretty familiar concept, hype yourself up, feel good. but it's how you talk about yourself to other people that is going to like seep in and make more long-term change. So I heard that yesterday and I was like, oh, I love that actually.
That's so true. I mean, one of them, the first one was the practical advice, because it's all cool to have all these ideas, but if you don't know where to go and who to talk to, it makes it much harder. So awesome sharing that there with Jamie and yourself and the Green Card crew as well. But also the second bit is beautiful because and I use this a lot in my coaching. I always ask people, what do you say about yourself? And they're like, what are you talking about? It's like, tell me what you say about yourself to other people or to I don't know what you're talking about. It's like, I'm pretty sure you talk about yourself. And once you become aware of it, you realize, like you said before, most of the time we don't talk about ourselves in a positive way. It's either neutral or it's deprecating. And if we go past neutral into not always positive, but if you're a high person, not just for an event, it just changes your whole mindset, which is quite hard to do, but really the product of that is exponentially amazing. Amazing shares there. Amazing, beautiful shares there. Tana, any last questions for Grace?
No, well, I think it's been a really good podcast. We've covered quite a lot. But I did like that last point because I think, like, relating back to my coaching experience that I've had so far, like initially I was quite joking and stuff like that with the girls, and a lot of it, after the first, I guess, couple of months, I did reflect on that and think about, was it me just like that's my way to feel comfortable in the team is to make jokes about myself and stuff like that. But I think as I've gone through my coaching journey, I realized that actually for me it's a way to break that barrier and break that ice, because if you're willing to make jokes and crack jokes and all that kind of stuff, it just breaks that immediate barrier with the girls, and they feel much more comfortable to make those jokes about you but about each other and stuff like that as well. And so yeah, I think initially it's good to be able to reflect on that and question it, but also to know that it is okay to joke about yourself at times too. It's all
Yeah,
about finding that balance. It's not
That's so true. And I was saying before, like context is essential because
100%.
it creates like banter, which is so important. And that's why with like the Tall Poppy podcast, like I'm not saying Tall Poppy syndrome's bad. I'm just saying it's there, and how do we interact with it and how do you leverage it? Like you just said, Tane, with like self-deprecating humor. There is a time and a place, and sometimes that's really funny and sometimes it's not. So it's like when, and that's the same with tall poppy syndrome, is I think it serves a purpose. I honestly do. And a lot of people wouldn't be as successful as they are without it. But when and where and how you interact with it. Classic.
That is so true. Context in everything in life, context is important. We
Yeah.
just have to put everything in context, and it's not just a single visual line that we see, which is always true. Grace, thank you so much for jumping on today. I've learned so much about just a little bit about you, which is really, really beautiful. There's so many phrases in this conversation that I'm going to take and think about. So beautiful. Thank you for jumping on. Thank you for sharing your time. Thank you for sharing your aroha across this time and space, which is beautiful. That amazing smile. And I'm sure our listeners have gained something from today. If they haven't, go back and listen again because I know you've missed something. Till next time, our listeners, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment if you'd like to. But the most important thing is don't forget to put something into your past knowledge, and don't forget to keep smiling. And just remember, context is everything. Till next time, ka kite. Bye, everybody. Peace.
Thank you for listening to Baskets of Knowledge.
Yeah, we hope that you found something useful to put into your basket of knowledge. And as we said before, remember to put something little into your baskets of knowledge every week. And as always, feel free to like, comment, and share this podcast. Thanks, everybody. Bye.